Hello and welcome to the Car Canada Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2024 Honda Ridgeline. Is it a truck? Is it a pickup? And in today's video, we're going to do a proper technical review under the hood. We're going to take a look at the outside, the inside, some things we like, some things we do not like, right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood. And there's only one powertrain configuration in the Honda Ridgeline. Starting with the engine, this is a V6 naturally aspirated, the J35Y6. Very old school engine from Honda. Surprised that they haven't updated it to the one in the Pilot, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. Let's start with this mechanical construction. Very top, you have plastic valve covers. This is a timing belt engine. This does have single overhead cam, which is something I never thought we'd say in 2024, and it does have a single piece aluminum cylinder head. Now this engine does have VTEC, but in addition to VTEC, it has VCM, variable cylinder management, or to translate that into English, cylinder deactivation. Pretty sophisticated one, I have to say that. Here's how that works. So it has three modes of operation. If you're cruising, it'll shut down an entire bank, and this engine will run on 3 cylinders, being an inline 3 basically. And when you're running at light load, not pushing it, but you're accelerating lightly, it'll run on 4 cylinders, on 2 on opposing banks. So you basically have a V4. First time you can say that, and it's correct. And then when you demand high acceleration or high load, it runs on all 6 cylinders. And the way they do that on paper sounds like a work of genius, but it isn't, honestly, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. So here's how this works. This engine, because it's old school, it has rocker arms, and of course manual valve adjustments and everything, just like the old school Honda engines. But they put 2 rocker arms right next to each other. One of them is activated by the cam, and one of them is actually what's going to push the valve to open it. So the way this works is there's a little piston in between them. When you want to deactivate the one cylinder, the piston will move where the cam, when it pushes the one rocker, it won't activate the second rocker. But when you want to engage that cylinder and make it work, that piston will move hydraulically. It's just oil pressure that controls it. It'll move, engage. Now the 2 rockers will move together. So when the cam pushes one of them up, the other one will move with it. And that's how this is done. Pretty interesting design. It's actually a lot better than others that have done cylinder deactivation, but still adds a lot of complication. Service is so important with this engine because it relies 100% on oil for these things to work. So yeah. The second problem with VCM is when you shut off cylinders, you actually cool that cylinder down, and you'll have these big differentials in temperature. And over time, it's actually not good for the engine. That's why VCM engines are known to start burning oil at some point. Maintenance is key with these engines, folks. I cannot emphasize this enough. Now, this engine is a timing belt engine, which means the water pump is driven by the timing belt. You have cam seals, you have crank seals, like the good old days. Oil pump sits in those that are cranked. That's how timing belt engines usually are designed. Now, the cooling system in this is super simple. We already told you the water pump is driven by the timing belt. Very simple. Thermostat, no valve, no distributor, nothing. It's just very, very basic. There is not much to it. Now, this car does have electric steering, so you don't have that power steering pump. So changing the timing belt on this is actually not very difficult, which is nice. Front 2 covers in the front, one cover at the bottom. It's a very simple timing belt to do. Water pump is right there. Things are good as usual there, because the most, not complicated, but like something that was in your way in the past was the power steering pump when you did the timing belt on one of these. Well, that's not here anymore, so there you go. And because of the design of Honda that stayed from the past, you don't actually have to remove a plenum to do spark plugs. It is a little bit of a harder reach in the back because of the way this engine sits in this particular car, but you can reach it without removing anything, and that is pretty cool. Now, this engine has direct injection only. 6 direct injectors sit right underneath the intake manifold. High pressure fuel pump sits on the side, not on the valve cover, just a little bit to the side, which is a good location for it. Same thing with the direct injectors. Now, the transmission in this is a pretty interesting thing to see in a Honda. Now, this has been going on for a few years now, but this is not a transmission made by Honda. Honda with transmissions have had a history, let's put it this way. This is a ZF transmission. German manufacturer, actually really good German manufacturer of transmissions. This is a 9-speed automatic transmission. There's one giant quirk about this transmission that you need to know about. And for that matter, almost all ZF transmissions are like that. This transmission hydraulically comes out of park. It's always in park. So when it loses hydraulic pressure, it defaults in park. That's just how it sounds, like a disaster, but it's actually not. Well, if you lose hydraulic pressure or you're unable to crank the engine, you actually can take this car out of park. With it, this has buttons, and there is usually cars that have a ZF transmission will have some kind of a lever, cable, something to pull it out, except this one. It doesn't. They gave you another very DIY solution. On top of the transmission, there's a little lever, which is actually the shaft. You turn it, and that gets you out of park mechanically, and you have to hold it, and it'll stay out of park. I wish they would have gotten a little bit of a more sophisticated release, but at least that little thing is easy to access just under the hood, mechanical hood. You open the door, you get into it if you can't crank the engine to get out of park, because it has buttons. That's the only strange thing about the ZF transmission, but otherwise, it's a very smooth shifting transmission in this. ZF transmissions usually shift quick and they're smooth, and I really like that about them. Now let's talk about how do things look under the hood. This is a little bit on the old cooler side of things for Honda. So I don't see a lot of heavy use of plastic and just everything is flimsy and cheap like some of the newer cars we're seeing. Things are pretty consistent with what you're used to seeing from Honda, with some interesting observations. For the longest time, Honda stuck to the bolts and the air filter housing. Lately, we're noticing they're getting rid of that with regular clips for the air filter and move in the right direction. Then the battery, this is something that they wouldn't change. I mean, you want to change a battery or you want to just jump start the battery. You have this giant air dam thing on top of the battery. Why would you do that? This is a simple car that people love it for simplicity. Why would we have stuff on the top of the battery making battery replacement even more complicated? I don't know why they do that. Good stuff are though, this is a very familiar engine for most. I mean, it's extremely familiar because it's been a version of this engine has been going for a very, very long time. Timing belt, even though it's an additional service to this engine, it's a very familiar one. You can have anybody do that. And then the spark plugs as well. They're actually simple, a little bit harder to reach in the back, but there's nothing to remove in the way. That is the cool thing about them. Couple concerns with this engine though. VCM, cylinder deactivation, long-term reliability, they usually don't get along. Not to a point where the engine is gonna stop working completely and whatnot, but they do have a track record of burning oil because of that. That's one thing. The second thing is direct injection only. Eventually carbon buildup will be an issue. I wish they would have kept it port injected only. That would have been nice. And that VCM stuff, I understand why they're doing that for emissions, but these two things never a good idea for longevity in an engine. Let's take a look underneath the 2024 Honda Ridgeline. Again, this is a kind of on the old school side. First thing is, it's this very heavy duty metal cover on top of the oil pan. Protect the oil pan, in case you go a little bit off-road, but the transmission just doesn't get anything. This is that ZF transmission, 9-speed transmission. Interesting to see a ZF product in a Japanese car because if you look at the bolts, usually we are not used to seeing bolts like that in a Japanese car. This is more like it. Transfer case attached to it. This is just the transfer case that sends power to the back all the time. Honda still uses the 3/8 style to take out the drain plug and fill plug. Oil pan is still aluminum. If you come around, still have the exact same setup. If you over tighten this when it's hot, it will strip the thread and you have to replace the oil pan. All this stuff just hasn't changed. With that, let's look at the front suspension. Lower control arm is aluminum with the ball joint part of it, which this was separate. And then dual piston caliper here. This is again a bigger pickup. We're not going to call it a truck. We're going to call it a pickup. Steel knuckle, which is not very well finished. I feel like this was not painted because it has this appearance to it of what appears to be rust. McPherson strut at the top with a strut that goes into the knuckle like this style, not bolted to it. I wish it was the other style, a little bit easier. If you come around though, this is a steel sway bar, which is nice. Honda's getting away from the plastic inside sway bars, which are really nice. Now the exhaust is what Honda's historically has been just okay. They're not the best quality in the world. You do have a big flex pipe right here, which I wish that was not the case. And then you follow that up. Here's the cat. Surprisingly, the cat used to be just an individual piece. In this one, if you follow this pipe, this is actually one unit with this entire pipe. I wish that was not the case, like the past. You just have a flange here. Then we have two mufflers here, and then we come out the back. You notice, because this car is old school, you don't have a lot of big covers. Everything is kind of exposed. Decent quality on everything. I guess some of the seams are wide open, which they were covered. Some of them are, some of them are not. Over here it is covered, and then you follow the drive shaft, semi-support bearing right here, and then the fuel tank. This is an L-shaped fuel tank, so it goes over the muffler, but it doesn't come down. It just comes down here, and that's it. You do notice that they gave you a little bit of a bar behind this plastic cover to protect it. Usually Honda puts another beam on the side to protect the fuel tank, but this one, if you look on this side of the tank, doesn't have anything. Although it doesn't hang low, but I wish there was another protection here. You notice the relics parking brake cables. Very interesting that they come through the side, not the middle. And of course they go into the rotor hat. This doesn't have electronic parking brake. Very interesting setup. We'll look at the suspension and everything in a second here. But here's that rear differential with the motor in the side. I think they call it VTM something. It's basically a differential with a motor that engages and disengages to make all-wheel drive happen. The axles are not huge in the back. Again, this is not 4x4 and you're gonna go heavy off-roading with it. It's decent, but it's not a truck. Now let's look at the rear suspension here. Very simple rear suspension. Aluminum knuckle. You do have some steel arms holding it. And strut in the back. Steel sway bars, which is nice to see. Kept thinking this is a very simple suspension. They've used it for a lot of years. It works very well. When we look at the very back, you notice that the exhaust splits from the muffler and then it comes into two pipes. There are these little resonators here, one there, and then the exhaust pipe comes out. There is no spare tire underneath this. We'll look at the spare tire where it's at in a little bit when we look at the outside, but this is a box. And we're also going to talk about this when we do the tour outside. Trailer hitch, it's rated at 5,000 pounds, which is decent. It's not, again, this is not a truck, this is a pickup. And then it has the tone connector. This is a 7-pin connector. It's interesting to see that here. Now the sides are very open. This is interesting for an old school truck, but again, I said truck pickup, don't be nice to me. Again, on this side, it is wide open. Everything overall shows good quality, pretty much what you expect from Honda. Nothing over the top, nothing under. But we notice one strange thing because of the orientation of this. We have this is, I feel, where the Pilot ended and they started, because this is a very strange contraption, especially if you look at it from this side. You see the opening where the bed is. It's just a very interesting style here. Let's take a look at the outside of the Honda Ridgeline. I really like how this thing looks. It just has a unique look to it. It does look a lot like any other Honda, but they just managed to get a few things right. There's a few good things, few interesting, not good things. First, Honda badge has the radar sensor right behind it. A little bit on the oversized, but again, this is a pickup, so we're trying to make things bigger and better. So this headlight is a very interesting shape. It almost looks like an eye with an eyebrow. It's a nice look. It will eventually grow on you. But then there is the interesting stuff. Doesn't this look like the hood is open, or this car has been in an accident and somebody didn't fix it right? I don't know why the manufacturers do that. If we would have just raised this a little bit more just to make it even with this panel, that I think would have looked nicer, but they didn't. That's okay, not a big deal. But you notice the rest of the hood features, there is not much to it. There's just this one line, comes down, same on the other side. That's it. That's why these cars, they usually will age well, because they're not over the top design-wise. We look at the side, it's the same thing. The only thing that is strange is this line comes here, and then it kind of, this one starts, and the other one disappears, and the other one goes. I wish they would have made this a little simpler, would have also worked. Interesting thing on this one, look at this cowl. It's a very strange cowl. It's like so low, because the glass goes so low on this. Very interesting to see this. You don't see this in a lot of cars. And equally, this little piece of glass. Very odd shaped glass. Most manufacturers would have closed this off, but they gave you this glass for visibility, and it actually works. Mirrors are decent size. They're not massive truck mirrors. They're just normal SUV mirrors in our pickup. And then, of course, because of the segment that this car is in, you do have push button to lock it, but it's actually touch sensor to unlock it. So I suppose kind of you get a compromise better than the touch on the outside. Sometimes doesn't work in bad weather, but it is only in the front, not in the back, expected of the segment. Then we come to this section. Before we go into the bed and talk about all that, there is something interesting here. See, this is the unibody right here. This is the quarter panel. If we look at the door here, this is one piece. This is the quarter panel, but it stops right here. Like if you go into an SUV, the rest of it is also part of it. It's one piece. But here they stopped right here. So should you get in an accident here, this is a panel. This is not the quarter panel. And that is pretty cool. Now this is the Trail Sport. Every single manufacturer is doing this, and it's starting to get a little much. The Overland Edition, even though everybody will end up buying the base model and do the modifications themselves, but this is the Overland Edition. So you have these very loud hummy tires for the one time a year you will go off-roading with it. It comes from the factory. It has off-road suspension. And there you go. Let's look at the back. Before we get into the bed, I do like how this looks. There isn't much to it. Taillight, that looks like a taillight of every single pickup out there. Bed door, another taillight, we're done. And of course, this has a bumper. It's not the biggest bumper in the world. I feel like some of this bumper is kind of hidden underneath the bed door, but you do have some bumper, but it is long. Now let's talk about the bed. And let's talk about the first thing of the bed. This, I mean, I don't want to slam it, but it's not a soft opening door. That I feel like is a nice feature in trucks. You just open it while it comes down, you start already ready to load. But here's the coolest thing about this. Something that every single truck out there should do. You can open this bed like this, but you can also open it like this. Kind of like a Lexus GX. Now some folks will say, well, this is the gimmickiest thing in the planet. What's the point of this? Actually, it's a very important thing, because when you open your bed like this, and some trucks will have bigger beds, you have to lean in to get your items. But if you do this, you don't actually have to lean, you're already here. That is pretty cool. And speaking of here, this is not the biggest bed in the planet, but it doesn't have giant humps here, because again, this is not a body on frame truck. This is a unibody. But the coolest thing because of that is you have this massive storage area here with a drain that you can open and drain the water. I don't know if they were going after this being a cooler, maybe, and you could, not advisable, but you could. And then spare tires right here, which is a great spot, much better than underneath it. Your toolkit's right here. This is a lockable compartment. Then you have another compartment right here that is not lockable. I advise you not to use it. I'll tell you why in a second. Just have a little compartment here. I advise you not to use this one because for some reason they decided that this is lockable, this one is not. So even if you lock the car, anybody can walk up to your pickup and help themselves to whatever you have here. That is not a great idea. But otherwise, I feel like the first generation of the Ridgeline, it felt kind of like they just took a Pilot, they cut the back, and they opened it up. This is more like it. This looks like a pickup. It's not a truck. You're not going to be hanging around with the cool truck buddies. But this is a bed that works for most folks that need a vehicle with a bed. And this is a great idea. I wish all real trucks would do this. This is a smart idea. And of course, just like all real trucks, we have dual exhaust pipes that just look the part. Hey, they actually do look pretty cool. I have to say that. They had to make it look like a real truck every bit as possible. But don't take it wrong way. I really like this, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later in the video. Let's take a look at the interior of the Honda Ridgeline. And this interior, although it's starting to show its age, but there's a certain feel to it of old schoolness. The part where manufacturers made everything plastic and nobody really complained. And this car initially, this generation, came out at a time when everybody wanted soft touch materials. That was the thing. So you have a lot of them on the touch surfaces, but the door is hard plastic. It's just a different, this comes from a different time. So what I love about this interior is how simple it is. No gimmicks, zero gimmicks, except one, small one. HVAC controls, very simple. Just laid out right in front of you. Doesn't take you more than 2 seconds to operate them. Infotainment screen, even though this is starting to show its age a little bit, but it's very basic to operate. Doesn't have the latest features. Doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, but it works. As you can shut it off and operate your entire car without it, and that is the cool part. Now the shifter is one of those buttons. Honda's been doing this for a while, and you have to have this with the ZF transmission. There's no way around it. But this car doesn't have brake hold, doesn't have any of those features. It just has mode or off-road mode, and then auto start stop off. That's all the buttons you have here. The steering wheel is very simple to operate with one small concern. The volume is one of these toggles, so you have to do this to change the volume, but underneath it is a very nice dial for the screen. Speaking of the screen and the gauge, it's just a tiny screen in the side and a big gauge, which I can live with that. But I wish these were on the steering wheel reversed, where the volume were the toggle, like the rotary dial, and then the screen controls were the button. Feel like you'd use the volume more. Small observation, not a big deal. But overall, this interior, the seats are very comfortable, and you could definitely feel comes from a different time. Seats are soft and they're well padded and everything. And there's a certain feel of this is a large space. Huge center console, which I really like. Very comfortable, lots of storage in the doors. Great visibility, especially out of this very tiny glass on the side. I really like driving this. It's refined. Even though it's a pickup, that's the good part about having something like this. It's a small pickup. You don't have the typical body on frame roughness and all that. It's pretty smooth, quiet, refined, and I really like it. Overall, I really like this interior. It's a breath of fresh air from the past with one gimmick, maybe two. So the shifter. I really dislike the button shifter. It takes you a minute to get used to it, but at least this is not the worst gimmicky one where you have a rotary dial. At least these are clearly labeled button, you'll get used to them. But the second one thing is, this, even though it's called a trail sport, it is the furthest thing in the planet from a sport car. But you have paddle shifters. I don't know, this again comes from a time when every single manufacturer were putting these in every single car just because. Let's take a look at the second row of the Honda Ridgeline. Before we get into the seat, talk about sizing and everything, this bottom of the seat folds up like so. Other side as well. This is a pretty cool space to use. It's pretty functional space. I like it. But here's the coolest thing. You fold the seat down, you have actually open space underneath it to store stuff, which is pretty cool. Now, getting into this seat, I am 5'7". This is my driving position. I don't have the biggest knee room in the planet, but it is pretty comfortable. This is a pretty comfortable seat because it is high. Floor is flat. I have very good headroom, even though this has a sunroof. It is a pretty comfortable back seat. Now, you do have rear climate vents Here, you do have some 12-volt outlet. You do not actually have USB-C or USB-A or anything. You do have, though, center armrest, which is pretty large with some round shaped things to put your round shaped objects here. I think this is for a pickup. This is a pretty good back seat here in the second row. Let's talk about some things we do not like about the Honda Ridgeline. First thing is, which is the biggest thing, I really like that tailgate door or the bed door that opens down into the side. It's great, except the fact that they forgot to put a lock. That would be really nice if we could lock that. I mean, you put stuff there, especially if you put like a tonneau cover or a big cover cap on top or whatnot. It would be nice if that locks, but it doesn't. Not the end of the world, but that's kind of an oversight, I feel like. And the last thing on this is the engine. Folks, it's a V6, and that's great. And lately, you know, all trucks are getting 4 cylinders with a turbo, and people are really upset over that. But it's not always rainbows of butterflies with V6s. Let me tell you that much. This is a very old school V6, which is great. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Except because it is an old school V6, you have to keep it emission compliance. The only way to do that is this has start-stop technology. This has VCM, which is variable cylinder management. Translation in English, cylinder deactivation. And then this has direct injection only. These are 2 things that don't help when these engines are old and have miles. So maintenance is key with these engines, folks. Actually, as important, if not more, than your little 4-cylinder turbo engine. Just keep that in mind if you're going in one of these. Just because it has a V6 doesn't mean it's the best version of the V6 they ever had in this series of engine. So should you buy a Honda Ridgeline? Folks, initially when you look at this on paper, if you are a truck owner or you're into trucks, real trucks with a body and frame, you're gonna think this is a joke. Actually, I feel like the joke's on us. I have to admit that. I really like this segment because not every single person out there who buys a truck actually needs a truck. Body and frame trucks are great for their intended purpose, but as a car you use every day, they do have their quirks. And they're high maintenance, and they're high weight, and they just, as much as manufacturers try to, although they are getting better in the current times, but also their prices are getting higher, they're never as smooth as a unibody car. So if you are that person that occasionally will need an open bed to haul stuff and whatnot, but for the rest of the time, you just need a comfortable car that gets decent gas mileage, that kind of blends in and you can use it as a family car, this is the perfect segment for you. And there are the likes like the Ford Maverick, the Hyundai Santa Cruz. But I feel like this one is one of the top ones. And not because it's a Honda and all that, because it's a bigger one, has a bigger engine, it's bigger inside, more comfortable. The bed is more usable, and it really feels as close as you can get to a real body on frame truck with some very cool features that body on frame trucks simply cannot have, like the giant storage in the bed floor. The Honda Ridgeline, however, is a little bit on the old school side. And there's a lot of things that are very old. I mean, this is a generation that's been going on since 2017. It's gotten a lot of updates throughout, but it's still an old design. But with that come good stuff, bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff first. The interior. Usually you look at it, it's like, wow, I can't believe they sell this in 2024. But at the same time, it's like, wow, I can't believe that we still can buy a car that is, or a pickup that is super simple on the inside, 0 gimmicks. And I love it. Everything is physical. Everything is meant to be non-intrusive into your day-to-day life. It's very smooth, very refined, feels like a Honda Pilot, but you have the bed in the back. I really like that. And then speaking of the bed, I really like that door that opens down and to the side. That is a very functional feature, and I wish actually real trucks would have that too, instead of the just overcomplicated bed doors that we're getting these days. This will do. It's very basic and it works great. And then that big storage in the bed, that's really helpful actually. A lot of real trucks don't have that. But the old school side also have some negatives. For example, that beautiful bed door that opens both ways, you can't lock it. It's kind of a super oversight. Wish it does have a lock. And then the other thing is the engine. Beautiful V6 engine, no turbos, no none of that, but it is direct injection only, a little bit on the old school side. And then it has VCM, which is variable cylinder management, which, let me translate that one more time. Cylinder deactivation. Really a bad idea in engines, and this of course has start-stop technology as well. So this was the time when this came out, where they took an old school engine and they added all this stuff to it just to make it pass emissions, basically. So some of this stuff is a concern, long-term reliability, but hey, it's a V6, there's no turbo, so you gotta pick which one you'd like. You'd like a 4-cylinder with a turbo or a V6 with some compromises. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.